It's no secret the 4th Shinobi World War was disappointing all across the board for a variety of reasons. This video won't be talking about those reasons, there's plenty of videos that break that down. Today's video will be focused on how exactly the war arc could have been made much better. At least in a way I think so. Be sure to like and subscribe. I'm just gonna go through everything numerically and subsequently explain why and how I think each reason could have made the war arc even better. Starting things off with my first reason, which is making the war last multiple years. It's hyper unrealistic of any war only lasting the 2 days that it did in the manga. That was an extremely dumb idea that decreases the seriousness of the war by how silly that time frame is. This could have been a golden opportunity to really put our protagonists in the harshest environment they have ever really had to deal with. Most of the series, there's an undertone of the Konoha 12 needing to step up, as they are going to be the ones who take over the Will of Fire and lead the village into the next generation. Nothing would exemplify them needing to step up like putting them in a warlike situation similar to what their predecessors had to deal with, and showing them having to take on a lot more responsibility as time progresses. This would have been a great way to reintroduce character arcs for a lot of the side characters who were pushed to the wayside, as opposed to the hyper fixation this series had on Naruto and Sasuke. Time spent on these side characters having to struggle with the harsh realities of war and seeing them have to grow and mature in real time would have done wonders in adding more depth to the story. And this could have easily replaced all the filler BS that we got all around the time during and before the war. Number 2, highlight the atrocities and the real tactics of war. This is almost a continuation of the number 1 point, and what I mean about this next point is the 4th Shinobi World War would have been a great way to implement many real-world concepts that actually occur within wars. We could have real examples of strategies among allied villages trying to obtain supplies and rations without being spotted by enemies. Covert missions within the war to gather intel about what the enemy is planning next. Prisoners of wars that get tortured and executed during the war efforts. Subterfuge behind enemy lines to spy on and gather more intel. Traitors who flip sides based on their moral and tactical understanding of the war changing over time. A tactical use of terrain. Since this is a world war fought all across a variety of landscapes, this should have been implemented to heavily influence the type of battle strategies that the warring factions utilize. Attrition and exhaustion. Showcase shinobi wearing down and dying because of a lack of food, water, and time to rest. Medical ninja getting overwhelmed because of the constant need to heal people, as well as the mental toll this would have on them. Morale being hurt because of this. All this could lead to the believable scenario of Naruto sharing his massive chakra pool to many people. This in turn would wear him out drastically. Political stakes could be shown as well. We almost never see anything about the feudal lords throughout the series, yet we're always told about how important they are. This war could be a great way to showcase their scope of influence, both in positive and negative ways, which would greatly affect the shinobi that were actually within the war. Imagine subplots of people trying to use the chaos of the war to assassinate and overthrow some of the feudal lords as well as the Kage, which would lead to internal trust issues. There are seemingly countless real-life situations that occur during wars that could have been implemented into the 4th Shinobi World War to make things way more interesting. Number 3, get rid of the Edo Tensei and the Zetsu. This jutsu, the Edo Tensei, is honestly one of the main things that cheapened the plot. The overutilization of this technique, as well as the Zetsu, made most of the war feel extremely unrealistic and stale because so many of the antagonists were shinobi we have already seen. We've already seen them have their moments in the sun. The Zetsu felt like fodder just to give the allied forces something to do. The Edo Tensei should not be nearly this easy to use, and it should not be this feasible to use that technique at such a grand scale. The technique should be used for one reason and one reason only, and that would be to revive Madara Uchiha. That's it. No other shinobi should get revived, and with that said, some of y'all are probably thinking, well, if none of the other shinobi and none of the Zetsu exist, who would make up the opposing side of the war? This brings me to my next point, number 4. The Shinobi World War should mirror previous wars. This means that the villages around the world should be fighting each other, not completely allied together. It actually makes no sense how the allied shinobi even got together so quickly and were in such agreement to help one another. Bijou and Jinchuriki are hated everywhere. Why the hell would all the main villages ally together to protect them? Plus, all these villages have some kind of history battling and warring against each other. So there must be some kind of deep-rooted hatred that exists amongst them. How I would change this would be by making the Akatsuki advertise themselves as a peacekeeping organization that has a grand plan to destroy the Bijou and Jinchuriki to ultimately strive for peace amongst all the ninja villages everywhere. Most of the villages would get convinced of this since they hate the tailed beasts and only use them for militia purposes. There would be a few villages that refuse to agree to these terms, and this will be led by the Leaf Village and the Sand Village. This disagreement is what leads to the Fourth Shinobi World War. Some villages wanting to get rid of the tailed beasts and other villages wanting to keep them. The Hidden Mist, Stone, and the Akatsuki would ally together, while the Sand, Leaf, and Cloud would ally together. Many of the smaller villages would choose sides as well. This leads to a far more realistic scenario of war efforts among all the hidden villages across the land. Number 5, making many important people die in this war. Okay, the last point here focuses on the extremely unlikely scenario that basically every major character just so happened to survive. I don't think it's really necessary to explain just how unrealistic that is. It's a problem I have with anime in general. There's constant necessity to never kill off characters and always having them linger around. My change will not have this happen. Imagine Choji getting killed in a tragic way, which leads to Shikamaru and Ino going into a deep depression because after the tragedy of Asuma dying, having to deal with Choji dying would be just too much for them to handle. Imagine Rock Lee unfortunately dying due to his lack of ninjutsu abilities and how much this would affect his friends. What if the trauma of Lee's death leads to Guy unaliving himself, since he would feel like a failure for not being able to help and assist Lee, and Kakashi would be the one to discover the body? This will be the third person in Kakashi's life who committed this tragic act. What if the trauma breaks the morale of the allied shinobi force to the point where Madara leverages this trauma as a way to convince people to defect from their side? He could also use the infinite Tsukuyomi as a way to influence people away from having to deal with any more tragedies of war and life in general. What if there's a subplot where Naruto hates the fact that this war is mainly being fought because of Jinchuriki like him and does something extremely reckless to try and end the war as quickly as possible, but this reckless decision making leads to a major death of one of his friends? There's so many ways the death of allies could affect the story, which would raise the intrigue of the war arc. The after effects of the war should have drastic reverberating effects on the story, where the survivors are left hurt mentally and physically, wondering how this would influence their decision making in the future. There's probably a lot more ways the war arc could have been improved, but honestly, I think these are good reasons. What ways would y'all improve the arc? And what do you think of these points so far? Make sure to comment them down below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll check y'all out next time.